Greetings, travelers. Welcome to Not a Dark Knight Guide in any capacity. This is because I assume it will be getting some gameplay adjustments in the middle of this expansion. I described the unholy trinity of previous expansion, and now we are in the desperate duo of current expansion. I'm only going to be looking at one of these jobs, since I have been constantly thinking about Dark Knight thanks to a casual suggestion that a single fan made to me in a private message. I am not a historian on this job, but I think I can help people understand the current pain points of Dark Knight players. Let's start with the positives. What is Dark Knight's greatest appeal? It's the aesthetic. That's literally it. Big swords and edginess, while also having one of the most popular job quest storylines. Those job quests do probably have my favorite line in all of Final Fantasy XIV, including the MSQ. That right there is one of the most anime lines I have ever seen. I don't really care too much about animations and aesthetics, I say, as I bust a nut to Iaijutsu and say that Astrologen has the prettiest animations in the game. I also insist on playing with all effects on just to see everything. Something, this job lost all the cool animations that you probably cared about. With my transition into complaints, I'm done talking about the positives. Despite what any Final Fantasy XIV boomer will tell you, the only consistent thing about Dark Knight's job design has been player dissatisfaction with the gameplay. The frustrating nature of the gameplay is there to help you build your inner darkness to better understand the job on a more spiritual level. That isn't to say that there aren't people who liked any version of its gameplay, but there are also people who enjoy being spit on. Which is why the game devs gave up completely and copy and pasted Warrior's core GCDs over to this job. One thing I should probably mention first though, before any of you Final Fantasy insert any other number or title here talk about how Dark Knight needs to be a DPS job, I'm here to tell you that I am not on your side and I wish that you would shut the fuck up. Go play Reaper and get your edgy DPS fix. Now that everyone who wanted to play edgy DPS and everyone who is begging for Blood to be added back into the game is gone, let's examine my personal grievances with this job. The Blackest Night, typically abbreviated to TBN. It is a cooldown that you've probably heard of. Some would call it the best tank cooldown in the game, and some would call it the worst. Both statements are kind of true. In the expansion before this one, in terms of spammable tank cooldowns, it was widely regarded as the best by many. The only real competition was old Nascent Flash, which only healed and didn't mitigate. Obviously, it's a little bit hard to understand heal versus shield, but healing doesn't help you live through a tank buster that just fucking outright kills you. A shield does though. The Blackest Night is also the only tank cooldown in the entire game that gets stronger when you pair it with another tank cooldown. So where do the TBN problems start? Well, it costs 3000 MP to use, and when you break the shield, you get to cast your damage skill that also costs 3000 MP for no additional cost. In theory, this means that you get rewarded for utilizing the skill correctly. In practice, if you do not break the shield that is only active for 7 seconds, you flush 460 potency of damage down the toilet. That fucking sucks. That's literally more damage than missing a whole fucking GCD, for crying out loud. Now, is tank DPS the most important thing on the entire planet? No. But does any other tank throw a fuckload of damage down the drain for not maximizing their tank cooldowns? Also no. Imagine having to heal on every hit of Bloodwetting, but if you're already max HP, you somehow lose a Fell Cleave. That shit would drive you insane. TBN is also a cooldown that somehow gets more punishing in this regard as you get better gear, and the shields are harder to break consistently, which feels completely counterintuitive to how gear progression for tanks should work. The only reason why it was a little bit more tolerable before is that you had to jump through some hoops to get access to what was one of the strongest spammables in the entire game. But with every other tank spammable now being on par or better than TBN, its flaws are ever more apparent in this department. Instead of just complaining, what would I, not a good game developer, do to address these issues? Well, you could buff the shit out of TBN to make jumping through hoops worth it, but that doesn't really seem in line with all the changes that have been made in the game moving forward. They are probably going to have to make TBN independent from Dark Knight's DPS output, similar to how they did this to a certain other tank in the past. There are many ways to achieve this. One possibility is just making it a 25-second cooldown like every other tank spammable, or if they still want to have it keep its MP cost, you can just gain a Dark Arts after the shield expires even if you don't break it. Either of these changes would dramatically reduce the skill floor of the job, but hey, that's been the goal for jobs going forward. Now, the reason why you want to make TBN independent from the DPS output is because it gives way more flexibility from the design standpoint when it comes to the Blackest Night. You can still reward people for timing the ability correctly by, I don't know, putting an extra damage mitt on it that only lasts for 4 seconds or something. Where would I get that idea from? Or you can make it give a regen if you manage to break the shield. It would still reward good play without casually ruining your damage output. Either of those changes would be fine, but you can only really start to consider them by not having the Blackest Night tied to DPS. I would see this entire mechanic rework as similar to the removal of Old Monk Greased Lightning. It will make it much easier for the devs to change up TBN, which probably needs a buff to be more in line with the other spammable cooldowns. Maybe Dark Knight could get an enhanced TBN at level 82 instead of Oblation, and you can call this new skill the Blackester Night. Tell me that Oblation doesn't just look like enhanced TBN from the animation department. Pain point number 2. Dark Knight feels like garbage in trash pulls. Even though Final Fantasy XIV is balanced around 8-person raids, most players do not do Savage or Ultimate. Most players do go through dungeons. And when a tank doesn't feel good to soak through trash pulls, it's going to make people upset. Of course, this is actually one of the easiest things to change about Dark Knight. You see, if only Dark Knight had a button that would heal them for every single enemy that they hit. Oh yeah, that's a thing. I'd honestly do a little hybrid here of old and new Abyssal Drain. You ready for my insane idea? How about Abyssal Drain and TBN share a cooldown? TBN will give you a shield and Abyssal Drain will heal you for every single enemy around you. Its cure potency could probably be buffed a bunch because you only get one hit out of it, and the cure potency is still somehow less than any GCD that you hit under Bloodwetting, but who's looking at those numbers? You don't even have to make this that complicated either. If you want to use my idea that TBN stays exactly the same, but gives you a Dark Arts always, you could give Abyssal Drain a potency of, I don't know, 160? I'm not really sure where I pulled that number from. Or if you decide to make TBN purely a tank CD, then Abyssal Drain will have 0 potency associated with it. Either of these approaches would be fine, Abyssal Drain for trash and the Blackest Night for bosses in single target. You don't have to make Abyssal Drain a GCD to get the best of both worlds from some old and new Dark Knight design, and it would be an easy way to make the job better in trash pulls without affecting how it performs in 8-man content. Generally speaking, being able to use Abyssal Drain more often in AoE is pretty much the goal here. You don't have to go with my crazy idea. You could even reduce the cooldown of Abyssal Drain just by using your AoE rotation. What I'm trying to say is that Dark Knight already has a button that makes it feel pretty good in trash pulls if they just got to use it more often, no matter how they decide to approach that. Pain point number 2.5, which is still related to trash pulls. Having only effectively one AoE button for 72 fucking levels is annoying as shit. For the love of God, if you are going to copy warrior design, please give us our second AoE button at at least level 45. And then you can give it a trait to gain blood at level 72. As much as people joke about 3-button combos basically just being one, it is so fucking painful to deal with. Pain point number 3, Living Dead. It is the worst invulnerability skill in the entire game. The only thing that is nice about this button is that you, the Dark Knight, do not have to time the initial cast as late as possible to ensure that its effect stays active long enough to do whatever the fuck it is that you need to do. Afterwards, it will make your healers want to talk to their therapist. My therapist is named Captain Morgan. Thematically, I do think it's great, and I love thematically running content. But here's a couple of things that could help. Number 1, for the love of all things, please do not punish healers for trying to heal Living Dead as soon as humanly possible. It's already an oh fuck moment for healing when you don't have benediction, and I would much rather encourage healers to hastily heal back Living Dead than punish them for trying to deal with the drawbacks as quickly as possible. Number 2, since it is impossible to fully maximize the duration of Living Dead, just add a couple of seconds to the invuln. It wouldn't make it that much better, but at least you can point to it being 2 seconds longer as the reason for why it's such a piece of shit to navigate as a healer. It's honestly not even going to throw the game balance off. Living Dead would still be a pain in the ass with these changes, but it would be less so. It's pretty funny because the reason why Living Dead feels even worse now is just because Holmgang got buffed. Why would you ever want to deal with Living Dead instead of just using Holmgang, which is strictly a better cooldown? Number 4, and my final major pain point. The core GCD rotation can't just be copy and pasted Warrior. I know I'm being real ambitious and also contradictory here, but allow me to be a generic complainer for a bit. Yeah, Dark Knight is the busy version of Warrior, and a large part of Dark Knight's damage output comes from the off-global cooldowns, but the core is exactly identical. Or probably a better way to put it, they feel exactly the same. These two tanks feel way more similar to each other than Paladin and Gunbreaker. But I do assume that changes like that would have to be reserved for next expansion, after making some other adjustments. Take a look at the pipeline for monk changes if you want to get an example. I'd say the devs already have old ideas to pull from in some capacity, but it would probably make sense for there to be a single target spell phase at some point for Dark Knight, but I'm not demanding anything, and I'm also incredibly warrior biased. I'm not going to elaborate with some kind of actual DPS rotation idea, but I'm going to go with literally anything else at this point would feel like a step in the right direction. And maybe don't leave this job crying alone on the side of the street while you treat their siblings so much better. And my final pain point, number 4.5, Blood Weapon. In the end with this video, my point here is to take all of my suggestions and throw them into the nearest dumpster. I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. I am simply here to express where my personal problems with this job come from. I'll leave it to the professionals on Reddit and the official forums to tell me what the true way to fix this job is, similar to how I leave it to the optimizers to tell me how worthless my mediocre, shitty gameplay is. But hopefully this can give you a better understanding of where some of the core issues are coming from. Even though this job is pretty much untouched this expansion, it really feels like it just didn't get any love at all for what is ultimately still one of the most popular jobs to have unlocked so that you can go AFK. It is literally a case of every other tank getting a buff and Dark Knight being left out from the party. The only way that you'll feel good about Dark Knight is if you simply don't see how good every other tank has it. Except Dark Knight does do the most DPS of all the tanks currently. Not as if people like tanky tanks for hard fights or anything. Something, Paladin or Warrior have the worst DPS numbers right now despite being viable and somewhat desirable in spite of that anyways. Meaning that just because Dark Knight might be meta in some department doesn't mean players are satisfied with its gameplay. And nothing in the game is bad enough to truly be unviable anyways. Play Dark Knight if you like it. It's always better to play what you personally enjoy. Now let's get out there and tell me about the good old days of whatever mechanic you personally liked about Dark Knight version 1 of 100.